You want me to what? Senior Training Officer Zaxtal's secondary breathing bladders inflated in shock, causing his crystalline exoskeleton to shimmer with an iridescent display of disbelief. Just observe their basic military training procedures. Supreme Commander Velox repeated, her primary tentacles weaving a pattern of bureaucratic resignation. The Terrans have officially joined the Galactic Defense Coalition, and as per Article 7.3 of the Integration Protocols, we must evaluate their training methodologies. But they're Deathworlders! Zaxtal's voice crackled through his translator. Their planet has active volcanic regions, multiple apex predators, and weather patterns that would dissolve half our fleet. Which is precisely why we need to understand how they prepare their warriors, Velox countered. The swarm is pushing at our borders again, and we need every advantage we can get. Besides, she added, her tentacles forming the pattern for wry amusement, how bad could it be? 3 solar cycles later, Zaxtal stood at the edge of what the humans called a parade ground at Fort Benning, Georgia, Earth. His protective environment suit was already working overtime to compensate for the planet's brutal gravity and the oppressive humidity that seemed intent on corroding his crystalline structure. The human officer beside him, Colonel Sarah Chen, smiled in what he hoped was meant to be a reassuring manner. Don't worry, sir. This is just basic training. The stuff we put all our new recruits through. Nothing special. Zaxtal's translator must have malfunctioned. Nothing special? He'd reviewed the training schedule she'd provided, and it had to be some sort of error. No species would voluntarily subject their young to such tortures. Shall we begin the observation? Colonel Chen gestured toward a group of human recruits assembling in the pre-dawn darkness. Zaxtal's external sensors registered the temperature at what would be considered a medical emergency on his homeworld. The next 28 Earth days would forever change his understanding of the universe. Day 1 began with something the humans called a fun run. Zaxtal watched in horror as the drill sergeant led 78 recruits on a 5-mile journey through terrain that would qualify as an obstacle course on most civilized worlds. The humans didn't even wear protective gear against the various indigenous flora they crashed through. Is this not dangerous? He asked Colonel Chen as they followed in a climate-controlled transport vehicle. Dangerous? She laughed. This is just to warm them up. Wait until we start the actual physical training. The actual physical training involved the recruits repeatedly lifting their own body weight against Earth's cruel gravity, punching the air in coordinated strikes that would shatter his species' crystalline forms, and performing something called burpees that seemed designed by sadists. They're not even using anti-grav assists, he noted in his report that evening. They call this building basic strength. I fear I may be documenting the practices of madmen. By day 5, Zaxtal had witnessed the recruits practicing something called hand-to-hand combat. They voluntarily engaged in physical conflict with each other, without weapons or shield generators, using only their naturally evolved appendages and something called martial arts techniques. But why not use ranged weapons? He asked during one particularly brutal demonstration of something called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Oh, we get to those later, Colonel Chen explained. First, they need to learn what to do if they lose their weapons, or run out of ammo, or need to fight quietly. Zaxtal's secondary breathing bladders nearly seized at the implication. They expect to continue fighting after losing their weapons? Of course. That's why we also teach them improvised weapons. You'd be amazed what you can do with a sock full of batteries or a rolled-up magazine. Day 12 brought them to the confidence course, which Zaxtal quickly realized was a human euphemism for death-defying insanity. The recruits climbed towers without safety harnesses, swung across chasms on ropes, and crawled under actual projectile fire. The rounds are fired well above them, Colonel Chen assured him when he began broadcasting distress patterns. It's just to help them get used to the sound and keep their heads down. Get used to? But why would they need to? Well, you can't expect every firefight to happen in ideal conditions, right? Zaxtal added 3 pages of alarmed observations to his report that night. The swimming qualifications on day 15 nearly caused him to abort the mission entirely. The recruits were ordered to jump into a body of water, already a death sentence for his species, while wearing their full combat gear. Then, rather than immediately returning to the safety of solid ground, they were expected to stay in the water for extended periods, occasionally having their limbs restrained to simulate adverse conditions. How many fatalities are typical during this exercise? He asked, trying to keep his voice professional. Colonel Chen looked puzzled. Fatalities? Oh, no one's died during swim qual in years. We have safety swimmers standing by, and everyone's already passed the basic swimming test before this. There's a more basic test? Sure. Everyone learns to swim as a kid. Well, most of us. That's why we offer remedial swimming classes before basic training starts. Zaxtal spent that evening trying to comprehend a species that taught their young to survive in liquid death as a recreational activity. Day 19 introduced him to the concept of urban warfare training. The recruits were now learning to fight inside artificial structures, breaking down doors, clearing rooms, and moving as coordinated units through what humans considered typical civilian environments. The fact that humans built their habitats sturdy enough to withstand combat operations spoke volumes about their evolutionary history. "And all your warriors learn this?" he asked as they watched a squad practice breaching techniques. "All of them," Colonel Chen confirmed. "You never know when you'll need to clear a building. Could be a hostile force, could be a rescue operation, could be a natural disaster response." Natural disaster? You mean you send warriors to fight your planet's weather? Someone's got to help during hurricanes and floods. Speaking of which, wait until you see our water rescue training. Zaxtal decided not to wait and submitted a medical exemption request for that particular observation. The field exercise phase beginning on day 22 tested the limits of his environmental suit and his sanity. The recruits were deployed into one of Earth's wilderness areas with minimal supplies and expected to survive while completing mission objectives. They ate things they found growing on trees, created shelters from local materials, and somehow maintained operational readiness despite conditions that would have caused most species to declare the planet uninhabitable. "Is that recruit eating a plant that was until recently underground?" he asked, watching a soldier cheerfully munch on something called a wild carrot. "Good spotting skills," the drill sergeant commented. "Though I hope they checked it wasn't hemlock. That'd mean push-ups for the whole platoon." Hemlock? Poisonous plant. Looks similar. That's why we spent those 2 days on wilderness survival and plant identification. Zaxtal added another note to his report. They casually harvest and consume local flora despite the presence of toxic variants that could cause immediate death. Training includes identification of lethal specimens, but does not preclude foraging activities. The final days of training introduced the recruits to various weapon systems, ranging from simple projectile weapons to more sophisticated energy-based options. What disturbed Zaxtal most wasn't the weapons themselves. The Coalition had plenty of those, but the humans' insistence on practicing with them in adverse conditions. "You want them to maintain and operate precision equipment in the rain?" he asked during one particularly wet session. "Enemy's not going to wait for good weather," the drill sergeant replied with a shrug. "Neither do we." On the final day, Zaxtal watched the graduation ceremony with a mixture of relief and lingering horror. The recruits, now soldiers, stood proudly in formation, their bodies transformed by the grueling training regime. They looked harder somehow, more resilient. Like they'd been compressed by Earth's gravity and forged in its hostile environment into something new. Colonel Chen stood beside him, beaming like a proud parent. "So what do you think? Ready to recommend some joint training exercises?" Zaxtal's crystalline structure shuddered slightly. "Colonel, with all due respect, I will be recommending that the Coalition immediately accept any and all human military assistance offered, and that we express our profound gratitude that your species fights on our side." "Oh?" She raised an eyebrow. "But this was just basic training. Wait until you see what we do in advanced individual training." Zaxtal's translator definitely glitched then, because surely he hadn't heard that correctly. "There's more?" "Of course! This just teaches them the fundamentals. Each soldier goes on to learn their specific job after this. The combat medics, for instance, have to learn to perform emergency surgery while sleep-deprived and under fire. The engineers learn to build bridges across active lava flows. The special forces, well, that's classified, but let's just say it makes this look like kindergarten." That evening, Zaxtal submitted his final report to Supreme Commander Velox. It contained only 2 sentences. The humans consider activities that would qualify as extreme survival challenges on most worlds to be basic preparation for their warriors. Request immediate allocation of resources to ensure continued positive diplomatic relations with Earth. As he prepared for his return journey to the relatively safe environment of deep space, Zaxtal overheard 2 of the graduating soldiers discussing their plans. "Man, I can't wait to go home and sleep in a real bed again," one said. "I know, right? Though I'm gonna miss the morning runs. Thinking about signing up for one of those ultra-marathons through Death Valley." "Nice! Hey, maybe we could do that survival camping thing in Alaska next summer? You know, for fun. Zaxtal's protective suit registered a spike in his vital signs as the full implications hit him. These humans didn't just survive their hell world. They actively sought out its most dangerous aspects for recreation. They voluntarily subjected themselves to additional challenges beyond their already unprecedented training requirements. The Coalition had unknowingly allied itself with a species that treated environmental conditions capable of destroying advanced technology as a pleasant weekend diversion. For the first time since the swarm had appeared at the galaxy's edge, Zaxtal felt something approaching pity for the invaders. They had no idea what was coming. As his shuttle broke through Earth's atmosphere, he sent one final personal message to Supreme Commander Velox. Most respected Commander, regarding your earlier question of how bad could it be? I believe I can now definitively answer. We have not begun to comprehend the meaning of bad. And the humans? They call it Tuesday. The end. Alien warriors froze in fear when they saw what Deathworlders consider basic training. Part 2. Advanced Studies. Supreme Commander Velox stared at the holographic display, her tentacles twitching in patterns of increasing concern as she reviewed Zaxtal's report for the 7th time. The Coalition Security Council meeting was scheduled to begin in mere minutes, and she still hadn't fully processed the implications of what she'd read. "You're certain this data is accurate?" she asked her aide, who hovering nervously near the chamber entrance. "Yes, Commander. Senior Training Officer Zaxtal has an impeccable record for thoroughness. Though I should note he's requested a temporary assignment to a low-gravity meditation facility for recovery purposes." Velox's chromatophores flickered with understanding. She'd approved that request immediately upon seeing the haunted shimmer in Zaxtal's crystalline structure upon his return. But now she had a more pressing concern, explaining to the Security Council why she was recommending an unprecedented acceleration of human integration into Coalition forces. The Council chamber itself was a marvel of xenoarchitecture, designed to accommodate representatives from 17 different species. Environmental bubbles, gravity plates, and atmospheric processors ensured every member could participate comfortably in the proceedings. Velox noted with interest that the human representative, Ambassador Chen, sat in an unmodified section. No environmental controls, no gravity adjustment, not even atmospheric enhancement. "The Council recognizes Supreme Commander Velox," announced First Speaker Nexthal, their photosynthetic appendages glowing with formal patterns. "You may present your assessment of Terran military integration potential." Velox activated her presentation interface. "Honorable Council members, I come before you today with both extraordinary news and what some might consider a disturbing proposal. As you know, we recently sent Senior Training Officer Zaxtal to observe basic Terran military preparation procedures. His findings have exceeded expectations." The Chamber's translator systems worked overtime as 17 species simultaneously expressed variations of curiosity. Ambassador Chen, Velox noticed, was trying to suppress what humans called a smile. "To begin with," Velox continued, "I must correct several misconceptions about human military capability. We had previously assumed their effectiveness against the swarm was due to advanced technology or specialized genetic engineering. We were incorrect." She displayed footage from the basic training observation. The chamber erupted in chaos as council members witnessed humans performing what they casually termed calisthenics. "Are they using hidden anti-gravity devices?" demanded the Centaurian representative, their gas-filled body contracting in shock. "No," Velox replied. "This is their natural physical capability in their homeworld's gravity." "But they're lifting their entire body mass repeatedly," protested the representative from the Aquatic Mer Collective. "Without mechanical assistance." "Indeed. They call this particular exercise a pull-up. It is considered elementary." The chamber fell silent as more footage played. Humans running through obstacle courses, engaging in close combat, swimming in full gear, operating in conditions that would qualify as natural disasters on most worlds. "Most significantly," Velox continued, "we must revise our understanding of human environmental adaptation. They don't merely survive in hostile conditions, they deliberately seek them out for training purposes." She played a clip of 2 soldiers discussing their recreational plans involving something called winter mountaineering. 3 council members had to activate their emotion suppression fields. "Based on these findings," Velox said, "I am recommending immediate implementation of the following measures. First, accelerated integration of human forces into all Coalition military branches. Second, establishment of joint training programs, under careful safety protocols for non-human participants. And third, she paused, knowing this would be controversial. I recommend we revise our classification of human worlds. Revise how? First speaker Nexthal asked, photosynthetic appendages pulsing with concern. We currently classify Earth as a Class 12 death world. I propose we create a new classification entirely. Earth isn't merely hostile, it's a forge. And its inhabitants aren't merely survivors. They're what happens when sapient life evolves to thrive in conditions we consider catastrophic. Ambassador Chen's smile was becoming harder to suppress. Furthermore, Velox continued, I recommend immediate allocation of resources to ensure we maintain positive diplomatic relations with humanity. Because there's something else you need to understand. She activated the final part of her presentation. What we observed was their basic training, their minimal standard. They have advanced programs that are, well, I'll let you read the classified appendix yourselves. The chamber erupted again as the council members accessed the additional data. Velox noticed Ambassador Chen finally giving up and grinning openly. Ambassador, the Mer Collective representative asked, their translator struggling to convey their mix of horror and fascination. Is it true that human special forces operators can function without sleep for days while performing complex tasks? Oh, that's just part of the qualification process, Chen replied cheerfully. Wait until you see what they do after they're certified. Velox's tentacles formed the pattern for diplomatic intervention before the council collapsed into complete chaos. Perhaps we should focus on the immediate recommendations. Ambassador Chen, would your government be amenable to hosting a delegation of coalition military advisors? Under strictly controlled conditions, of course. Absolutely, Chen beamed. In fact, we're preparing to start our next cycle of Marine Corps Scout sniper training. It's a fascinating program where candidates learn to remain motionless for days while 3 council members activated their emergency environmental shields. Perhaps, Velox suggested quickly, we should start with something more basic. Although, she added, reviewing her notes, I'm not certain what qualifies as basic by human standards anymore. Well, Chen mused, we could show them air assault school. That's pretty straightforward. Just some helicopter operations, fast roping from aircraft, conducting combat operations in elevated positions. The Centaurian representative's gas-filled body developed concerning ripples. They deliberately exit flying vehicles without teleportation equipment? Of course! How else would you quickly insert troops into a hot zone? Oh, speaking of hot zones, we should definitely show them our desert warfare training center in... Ambassador, Velox interrupted, her tentacles forming patterns of urgent diplomatic necessity. Perhaps we could discuss the specifics in a smaller committee, one with appropriate medical support standing by? Chen nodded, still smiling. Of course, Commander. Though I should mention, all of these training programs accept foreign military observers. We'd be happy to have coalition representatives participate directly in the exercises. The Chamber's universal translator system crashed as 17 species simultaneously tried to express variations of panic in their native languages. Later that evening, Velox added a personal addendum to her official report. Note for future reference, when humans describe something as basic or straightforward, immediately assume they are operating on a scale of difficulty incomprehensible to most sapient species. Further note. Recommend updating coalition combat doctrines to account for the fact that what humans consider routine training qualifies as impossible or suicidal by most military standards. Final note. Thank whatever forces guide the universe that they're on our side. As she prepared to leave the council chamber, she overheard Ambassador Chen speaking with her aide via communication device. Yeah, they took it pretty well. Though I didn't mention the underwater demolition training or the Arctic warfare school yet. Thought we should ease them into it. No, I haven't told them about the civilian extreme sports either. Can you imagine their reaction to free solo climbing? Or wingsuit-based jumping? Yeah, probably best to save that for later. Baby steps, right? Velox's tentacles formed a pattern that had no direct translation in any coalition language, but roughly approximated to, what in the name of all celestial bodies have we gotten ourselves into? The answer, she suspected, would prove either terrifying or magnificent. Possibly both. First speaker, Nexthal's photosynthetic appendages pulsed with an unusual pattern of agitation as they reviewed the latest report from the Human Coalition Integration Committee. The document, marked with multiple priority indicators, detailed the first attempt at a joint training exercise between Coalition Special Operations units and human military instructors. "This cannot be correct," they muttered, their bioluminescent patterns shifting through various shades of disbelief. They must have misunderstood the parameters. The report in question described what the humans had termed a light introductory course, designed to help Coalition forces understand basic human combat methodologies. The casualty rate was 0, but the psychological trauma statistics were concerning, to say the least. A soft chime announced the arrival of Supreme Commander Velox, her tentacles arranged in a formal pattern of greeting tinged with what appeared to be exhaustion. "Ah, Commander." Nexthal's appendages flickered in acknowledgement. "I trust you've reviewed the preliminary results of the Joint Training Initiative?" "Indeed," Velox replied, her chromatophores displaying a complex pattern that somehow managed to convey both pride and mild horror. "Though I should note that Colonel Chen assures me this was merely a proof-of-concept exercise." "A proof of concept?" Nexthal's translator struggled to convey their incredulity. "Commander, according to this report, they had Coalition troops performing something called a casual morning ruck march, while carrying loads that exceed the safe lifting capacity of several member species." "Yes." Velox's tentacles formed a pattern of diplomatic agreement. The humans actually apologized for starting with such a basic exercise. Apparently they were concerned about making the initial session too challenging. "Too challenging?" Nexthal's photosynthetic appendages flared with alarm patterns. "Commander, 3 Centaurian observers had to be evacuated when they witnessed the human demonstrators conducting what they called a standard river crossing technique." "Ah, yes," Velox responded, her tentacles weaving a pattern of remembered concern. "Though in fairness, the humans did warn us that swimming in full combat gear was considered an elementary skill in their forces." Before Nexthal could respond, a priority communication alert flashed across their shared interface. The message was from Ambassador Chen, and its contents caused both Coalition leaders to experience their species' equivalent of a headache. "Commander," Nexthal said slowly, their bioluminescence dimming with apprehension. "Please tell me the Ambassador is engaging in what humans call humor when she suggests introducing Coalition forces to something called halo jumping." Velox's tentacles twisted into what had become known among her staff as the human situation pattern before responding. "I'm afraid not, first speaker. High-altitude, low-opening parachute insertion is indeed a standard military technique in human forces, though I should note they consider it less demanding than their high-altitude, high-opening methodology." "They have multiple versions of throwing themselves from the upper atmosphere?" "Indeed." Ambassador Chen was quite enthusiastic about demonstrating both techniques. She mentioned something about it being perfect training weather next week. Nexthal's photosynthetic appendages dimmed further. "And the part about incorporating underwater demolition training and Arctic survival techniques? Standard components of their special operations qualification process, apparently." Velox's chromatophores flickered with what might have been amusement. "Though they did offer to postpone the extreme environment training until our forces master what they call the basics." At that moment, another priority message arrived. This one contained footage from the ongoing joint training exercise, specifically a segment showing human instructors demonstrating their approach to urban combat operations. The video showed humans moving through structures in what they termed challenging conditions, which apparently meant the buildings were on fire, partially collapsed, or both. "Commander," Nexthal said after a long moment of silence, "I believe we may need to reconsider our approach to military integration with the humans." "Oh?" Velox's tentacles formed a pattern of inquiry. "Yes. Instead of attempting to train our forces to their standards, which I now believe may be physically impossible for most species, perhaps we should focus on finding ways to effectively support their operations while maintaining a safe distance from whatever they consider basic training." Before Velox could respond, a third message arrived. This one was a casual invitation from Colonel Chen to observe something called Marine Corps Scout Sniper School, which the message described as a relaxed 3-month course focusing on fundamental skills. Attached to the message was a preliminary curriculum that caused both Coalition leaders to activate their stress suppression systems simultaneously. "Commander," Nexthal said carefully, their bioluminescence now barely visible, "does this document actually suggest that human snipers learn to remain motionless for days at a time in hostile environments, while maintaining the precision to engage targets at ranges that exceed our best targeting computers?" "Yes," Velox replied, her tentacles forming a pattern that somehow conveyed both resignation and admiration. Though according to Colonel Chen, that's just the qualification phase. The actual training apparently becomes interesting after that. Interesting? Nexthal's translator seemed to struggle with the word. Commander, I've reviewed the combat footage from their engagements with the swarm. Are you suggesting that what we've witnessed isn't their full capability? Velox's chromatophores displayed a pattern that could only be described as grimly amused. First speaker, I believe we're only beginning to understand what humans are capable of. Just yesterday I learned that they have civilian sports that would qualify as extreme military training on most coalition worlds. Civilian sports? Indeed. Apparently human civilians regularly engage in activities like free climbing, scaling vertical surfaces without safety equipment, and ultra-marathons through environmental conditions that would trigger planetary evacuation protocols on most worlds. Nexthal's photosynthetic appendages produced an emergency distress pattern. They do this for entertainment? So it seems. Ambassador Chen mentioned something called an Ironman triathlon that involves swimming long distances in open water, cycling through challenging terrain, and then running what they consider a moderate distance, all consecutively, often in what they term mildly warm conditions. Before Nexthal could process this information, a final message arrived from the Joint Training Center. The contents were simple but profound. The human instructors were requesting permission to demonstrate what they called actual challenging training scenarios, now that the coalition forces had warmed up. Both coalition leaders stared at the message in silence. Commander, Nexthal said finally, their bioluminescence patterns showing a complex mix of fear and fascination. I believe we should inform the Security Council that our previous assessment of human military capabilities may have been significantly underestimated. Agreed, Velox replied, her tentacles forming a pattern of profound understanding. Though perhaps we should wait until after they've recovered from learning about human recreational activities. I understand several council members are still in therapy after discovering something called base jumping. As if on cue, another message arrived from Ambassador Chen. Hey, quick question. How do your species feel about something we call stress inoculation training? Don't worry, we'll start slow. Just a few days without sleep, some moderate environmental challenges, and basic survival scenarios. Nothing too intense for beginners. Velox and Nexthal exchanged what their species would consider meaningful glances. Commander, Nexthal said slowly, I believe I now understand why the swarm has begun avoiding human-controlled sectors of space. Indeed, Velox agreed, her tentacles forming a pattern that would translate roughly as cosmic irony. Though I suspect the truly terrifying realization is this. What we're seeing is what humans consider appropriate for teaching beginners. You mean, yes, first speaker. Somewhere out there, right now, human special operations forces are doing things that would make this training look like what they call a casual workout. Both coalition leaders contemplated this in silence, their respective biological displays showing patterns that their species had evolved to indicate a deep, existential recalibration of reality. Meanwhile, in the training center below, a human instructor could be heard cheerfully explaining to a group of increasingly distressed coalition observers. All right, now that we've covered the basics, who's ready to learn about night operations? Don't worry, we'll start with something simple, like tactical halo insertions during a thunderstorm. The Swarm Tactical Analysis Unit, designated S7249, reviewed the data stream for the 14th time, its neural clusters pulsing with increasing agitation. The information simply could not be correct, yet multiple confirmation sources indicated otherwise. Explain this anomaly, it demanded of the intelligence-gathering drone hovering nearby. The drone's crystalline memory matrix projected a series of images showing human military units conducting what coalition intelligence had labeled routine training exercises. S7249's secondary processing nodes nearly shut down from the computational strain of trying to make sense of the footage. The humans were deliberately exposing themselves to environmental conditions that would trigger emergency protocols in most spacefaring species. And they were doing so apparently for educational purposes. Query: purpose of voluntary exposure to hazardous conditions? S7249 transmitted to its superior, Hive Commander X8801. The response came back almost immediately. Assessment ongoing. Current hypothesis: psychological warfare demonstration. Alternative hypothesis: Humans possess previously unknown environmental manipulation technology. S7249 tagged this response with a probability indicator of less than 7%. The evidence suggested something far more disturbing. The humans were actually capable of functioning, even thriving, under conditions that the swarm had previously considered universally lethal to carbon-based life. A new data stream arrived, this one containing footage from what appeared to be a human civilian broadcast. S7249's primary neural cluster almost collapsed as it processed images of humans participating in something called an Iron Man Championship. Hive Commander, it transmitted urgently. Civilian population engaging in voluntary endurance trials exceeding military combat parameters. Request immediate analysis. The response took longer this time. When it came, the transmission carried markers of high-level strategic concern. Data confirms previous intelligence gaps regarding human capabilities, revising tactical protocols accordingly. Before S7249 could acknowledge, another data stream arrived. This one contained footage from a coalition military liaison office, showing human instructors introducing something they called basic Arctic warfare training to a group of coalition special operations units. The footage showed humans operating in temperature conditions that would freeze most species' biological processes, carrying equipment loads that exceeded standard safety parameters by factors of 3 or more, and engaging in combat exercises in what they termed mildly challenging terrain. S7249's analytical subroutines generated 17 different failure scenarios before it managed to stabilize its processing matrix. Query: definition of challenging terrain by human standards? The answer came in the form of additional footage, this time showing human special operations units conducting what they called advanced mountain warfare training. The conditions shown in the footage caused 3 of S7249's backup processing nodes to initiate emergency shutdown procedures. Hive Commander, it transmitted, adding urgent priority markers. Humans appear to be capable of operating effectively in environments that exceed our theoretical models for biological survival. Furthermore, they appear to deliberately seek out such conditions for training purposes. The response carried the highest level of strategic classification. Analysis confirmed. Implementing immediate tactical doctrine revision. Priority 1. Avoid engagement with human forces in what they designate as adverse conditions. Query: definition of adverse conditions by human standards? Unable to determine. Human parameters for environmental challenge exceed our measurement scales. Example: human forces recently conducted successful operations in conditions our sensors classified as unsurvivable, while describing environment as pretty nice weather for training. S7249's primary neural cluster initiated an emergency diagnostic cycle as it processed this information. A new data stream arrived, showing footage from something humans called selection and assessment for their special operations forces. The footage showed humans engaging in physical challenges that violated multiple laws of biological preservation, conducting complex military operations while severely sleep-deprived, and operating in environmental conditions that should have rendered organic life forms non-functional. Hive Commander, S7249 transmitted, adding markers for strategic urgency. Recommend immediate re-evaluation of expansion plans for sectors containing human military presence. Reason for recommendation? Multiple factors. First, human biological capabilities exceed our theoretical models. Second, their training methodologies deliberately expose them to conditions we classified as lethal. Third, and most concerning, these observations are based solely on what humans consider basic or introductory training. There was a long pause before the Hive Commander responded. When it came, the transmission carried markers of strategic withdrawal authorization. Recommendation accepted. Implementing immediate tactical withdrawal from human-controlled sectors. Priority directive. Avoid all contact with human military forces, especially in conditions humans designate as challenging or interesting. S7249 was processing this response when a final data stream arrived. This one contained footage of human civilians engaging in recreational activities they called extreme sports. The neural cluster's emergency shutdown was immediate and complete. When S7249 came back online, it found a new strategic directive waiting in its priority queue. All units, human-civilian recreational activities now classified as potential military capabilities. Update threat assessment protocols accordingly. Note: human designation of activities as fun or relaxing may indicate severe danger to swarm units. In a nearby sector of space, a coalition observation post recorded an unusual phenomenon. An entire swarm battle fleet executing an emergency withdrawal maneuver after intercepting footage of human Marines conducting what they described as routine beach landing exercises in weather conditions that the swarm's biological sensors classified as apocalyptic. Supreme Commander Velox, reviewing the report later, noticed an interesting pattern in the swarm's tactical communications. They had begun categorizing human-controlled sectors not as enemy territory, but as biologically improbable zones. Fascinating, she commented to Ambassador Chen during their weekly briefing. It appears the swarm has developed a new appreciation for human capabilities. Chen smiled that particular human expression that Velox had learned to associate with imminent revelations of further human extremes. Oh, that's interesting timing. We were just about to invite Coalition observers to watch our new integrated training program. Nothing too intense, just some basic space-to-ground insertion exercises. You know, orbital drops under fire, emergency atmospheric entry procedures, that sort of thing. Velox's tentacles formed what had become the standard pattern for human-related announcements, a complex mixture of resignation, admiration, and relief that humans were on their side. Ambassador, she said carefully, perhaps we should wait until the swarm fully processes their current tactical reassessment before we demonstrate additional capabilities? Oh, sure, Chen replied cheerfully, and though I should mention, the Space Force is developing some really interesting new training protocols. Something about zero-gravity combat in rapidly decomposing stations during solar storms. But that's probably too basic to be worth showing yet. Velox's chromatophores displayed a pattern that would translate roughly as cosmic irony combined with existential recalibration. Meanwhile, in deep space, Swarm Tactical Unit S-7249 was processing new intelligence, suggesting that humans considered their planetary gravity to be pretty heavy, and their atmospheric conditions kind of challenging. Its final report before requesting transfer to a deep space monitoring station contained only one line. Strategic recommendation: avoid all contact with species that evolved on world they consider moderately habitable. Probability of successful military engagement: incalculable. Additional note: their definition of basic training may indicate fundamental incompatibility with standard universe parameters. The end.